We remember Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk. Gilgamesh, who was 2/3 a god and 1/3 man. Gilgamesh, who was powerful but also cruel, so that the people of Uruk cried out to the gods for someone to come and bring harmony to that world. We remember how Aruru, the goddess of creation, heard the cries of the people, and out of the mud of the bottom of the sea she made Enkidu, who was 2/3 an animal and 1/3 man. Enkidu, who ran as fast as the animals and was as fierce as the lion and clever as the fox. Enkidu, who freed the animals from the traps set for them by the hunters, who ran with them and drank with them at their watering holes. We remember how a hunter went to the city of Uruk and told Gilgamesh of Enkidu, and how this hunter then returned with a woman, a priestess from the Temple of Love, and how she sang to Enkidu and he sang back, and how they became inseparable, and after that day the animals refused him. We remember how Enkidu and Shamhat returned to Uruk, and how Enkidu fought Gilgamesh, fought him hard until the two of them became friends. We remember how Enkidu and Gilgamesh went to the great cedar forest, how they killed Humbaba, the guardian of that sacred forest, and then cut down a tree, a gigantic tree from that forest, and dragged it to a raft they had built and brought it back to the city of Uruk. And from that day forward, in Uruk, there was a new sound. And this sound was the sound of hammers and saws. Carpenters were working day and night. Chairs, tables, houses with many rooms were built in Uruk. For the first time, people could go, not just lords and ladies, but all the people could go, and in their houses they would have a nice table or a chair. They could run their hands over that table and see all the winters and summers that tree had lived through, see those things recorded in that table like time itself made solid. They could touch the honeyed, amber-colored light in that wood and see the years, how they were fat and thin, each year like a tide line on a shore where a wave has stopped. So this beautiful honeyed music of wood and trees was all through that city. And the people of Uruk were happy, and they lived well. And then one night, Enkidu had a dream. And in this dream, there were talons clawing at him, clawing at his hair. And he was lifted by these talons up into the air, into the night sky. And out of the corners of his eyes, he saw that he was being carried by a great bird with the face of a man. And it hurled him through the night sky and then down to the earth, and it entered a huge hole in the ground, and it carried him down through spiraling tunnels. And finally Enkidu was dumped into a room, a low room deep in the earth, lit by red light. He stepped forward and he jangled against something. It was a pile of crowns, crowns and necklaces, crowns of kings, necklaces of queens. And he looked and he saw a long banquet table, and all the kings and queens of earth were there, and their arms were covered in feathers, and they were drinking dust out of clay bowls. And behind them, in flickering light, was the goddess Arishkagal, the goddess of the underworld. And at her feet was a woman made only out of bones, and she had a clay tablet, and she looked and saw Enkidu, and she said, "Who is this new one who has come here?" And Enkidu lifted up his arms, and they were covered in feathers. And Enkidu awoke. It was morning. The birds were singing their first songs. But a shadow was upon him and inside his bones. He went to Gilgamesh. He described his dream. Gilgamesh tried to cheer him up, but it was no good. He walked under a shadow, Enkidu did. And some days later, he did indeed become sick. He lay down on a bed of pain. He had a deep fever rampaging through his body. And raving on his bed, he spoke to Gilgamesh, and he said, "Gilgamesh, I've had another dream. In that dream, I saw Enlil, the god of earth. And he gathered all the gods in council, And he said, "They have killed Humbaba, the guardian of the forest. One of them must die." And Ea, the trickster god, said, "Must Enkidu die, though he is innocent?" And the gods began to argue. And their arguing and their cackling voices were like thunder at the edge of the sky. "Gilgamesh, I am done for. I am doomed. I can feel it. One of us must die. We have killed Humbaba. One of us must die." And he raved on that bed, and Gilgamesh wept, and he summoned all the medicine men and medicine women of the kingdom. And they came to his bedside, and they brought plants and prayers and magic songs, and they sang these songs over that bed. They sang them, invoking all the powers of the sea and the moon and the sky and the luminous earth, powers of bird and animal, powers of the deep roots of this earth. But it was no use. It was no good. He became sicker and sicker. And gradually the wisdom inside Enkidu that gave him knowledge of the moon and the sun and the patterns of the stars, this wisdom began to wither. And the knowledge inside him, the knowledge of the roots of the ground and the berries on the branches and the whiskers of the cats and the animals and the fur and the claws of this world, that knowledge began to wither. And the instincts which had kept him alive out there in the wild, that had helped him to drink from those watering holes and be as fierce as the lion and as clever as the fox and as compassionate and sweet as a dove on a branch, this knowledge began to wither. And so his body was like a tree, and that tree was on fire, a crumbling house, and his breath was like a small boy of bare skin huddling over a little tiny ember, which was his heart. And that ember was failing and flickering, and finally that ember went out, and that boy whisked out through Enkidu's mouth and into the air. And Enkidu was no more. And Gilgamesh wept at his bedside for 9 days. He wept and he sobbed, grieving for his dear friend Enkidu. And then the worm fastened on his body. And they had a great funeral for Enkidu there in Uruk. Songs were sung, prayers went up to the high skies above, incense was burned. And they carried his body in procession to a place in the ground. They dug a hole, they buried him in that ground. And the magic songs were sung. And the people grieved, and Gilgamesh grieved most of all. And when that funeral was over, Gilgamesh took his crown and threw it to the ground. And he threw down his scepter of power, and he threw down his robe that was green and golden, his kingly robe. He threw these things to the earth, and he walked through the gates of the city into the desert. The people watched him go. Soon the sand obscured him, and he could be seen no more. Gilgamesh headed to the wilderness. He wept and sobbed. He didn't know why he was there. He didn't know what he was doing. Raving and sorrowing, he went from day to day in that wilderness. How could he live knowing that death was everywhere and inside all things? And then, one day, he started to walk. Only his feet knew at first, and then the rest of his body knew. Then his heart knew, and finally his mind had the thought. And his mind said, "I will walk through the mountains of Mashu. I will walk to the edge of the world. I will speak with Utnapishtim, the man who lives forever, the one they call the Far Away. And I will learn from him the secret of eternal life." So Gilgamesh walked for many days. Through the wilds he walked, through the deserts he walked. He passed the hut where the hunter lived with his family. He passed the watering hole where Enkidu had drunk that clear water. He walked past the mountains, the cedar forest. On and on he walked. After days and days of walking, after long nights and long days, after heat and cold, and landscapes of rock and stone, and twisted trees and swamps, at last he came to a dim, twilit place. He saw mountains far ahead. The sky was the color of cinnamon or rust. It was red light. It was perpetual twilight. And he looked far ahead. And at the base of those great mountains, he saw two lights shining. They were like stars. He shielded his eyes. He looked forward. He could hardly see. They were so blindingly bright. And then he took his hand away, and he looked, and he saw them. Two shapes, two scorpion creatures. They were half scorpion, and they were half human. And one was a man, and one was a woman. And the man spoke and said, "Who is this who comes here? Who is this two-legged? He must be a god." And his wife said, "No, my husband, smell him. 2/3 of him is God, but 1/3 of him is human." And the man scorpion spoke and said, "Who are you, eater of foods, drinker of liquids? Who are you who comes to this place? Who are you who has sorrow in you like a long journey? Who are you who walks under a shadow, pacing through the problem of death? Who are you who comes this way? Who are you, and what do you want?" And Gilgamesh spoke and said, "I am Gilgamesh, king of Uruk. I am here. I am he who have killed Humbaba, the guardian of the forest. I am the ruler of that great city. I have come because I wish to walk through these mountains and to cross the sea of death and speak with Utnapishtim, the man who lives forever. I am here because I wish to learn the secret of eternal life." And the man scorpion spoke and said, "No one has done what you ask. No one can pass through the mountains of Mashu. It is not possible for a mortal to do what you ask. All life must perish. That is the law made by the gods." And Gilgamesh spoke, and he said, "I am Gilgamesh, king of Uruk. I am here because the brother of my heart, Enkidu, has died." And he wept, and his tears fell into the sand. And he said, "How can I go on knowing death is inside all things? That the small child, the flower, the great trees, the sun itself, the sea, all things must turn to ash and crumble away. My days are a walking misery. I live under a shadow, the shadow of the crow and the charcoal. I cannot go on. I must find an answer to this question. Help me, please." And his tears fell to the earth. And the scorpions spoke. And they said, "We accept your tears as offering. We accept your sorrow. It is sweet to us. You may pass through the mountains of Mashu. But be warned, you must be through very quickly. It is 12 leagues from one side to the other. It is 12 leagues from one side to the other. And once the sun rises, it floods that tunnel with fire. No living thing can exist in that tunnel when the sun rises. If you are in that tunnel, you will become ash." And so Gilgamesh took off running. It was a long way, even for him. He walked, he ran, he scrambled, he tore through that darkness. He ran 1 league, and the darkness was thick. There was no light. He could see nothing ahead or behind him. He ran for 2 leagues, and the darkness was thick. There was no light. He could see nothing ahead or behind him. He ran for 3 leagues, and the darkness was thick. There was no light. He could see nothing ahead or behind him. He ran for 4 leagues, and the darkness was thick. There was no light. He could see nothing ahead or behind him. He ran for 5 leagues, and the darkness was thick. There was no light. He could see nothing ahead or behind him. He ran for 6 leagues, and the darkness was thick. He could see nothing ahead and nothing behind him. He ran for 7 leagues, and the darkness was thick. He could see no light, nothing ahead or behind him. He ran for 8 leagues, and the darkness was thick. There was no light. He could see nothing ahead or behind him. He ran for 9 leagues. And Gilgamesh gave a great cry, for the darkness was thick, there was no light, and he could see nothing ahead or behind him. He ran for 10 leagues, and he felt the wind on his face. But still, the darkness was thick, there was no light, he could see nothing ahead or behind him. He ran for 11 leagues, and he saw a glow faintly ahead in the darkness. He ran for 12 leagues, and the light streamed out, and he was through. And he found himself in a garden of stone flowers, roses made of granite, irises of lapis lazuli, lilies of feldspar and diamond. Lilies of feldspar and diamond. It was the garden of the sun. And ahead of him he looked, and there was a vast sea there, a stagnant ocean. Its water was black like the darkness between stars, like charcoal burned for millions of years, hardly a wave. And to his right there was a great forest. And to his left, on the shore, there was a small stone house. So he walked through the garden of the sun and to that house. There was a woman outside. She was making wine. She saw him coming, and she bolted her door, and she clambered up onto the roof of her house. And she said, "Who are you who comes, eater of food, drinker of liquids? Who are you who comes to this place, two-legged mortal man? What are you doing in this place where no mortal comes?" And Gilgamesh spoke and said, "I am Gilgamesh, king of Uruk. I am here because the brother of my heart, Enkidu, has died, and his death is upon me. It seems the death of myself and all things in this world, even the snails and the birds, even the stars and the night sky. I am here because I am filled with grief and sorrow. My life is a broken tower, it is ashes. I am here because I wish to cross the sea of death and speak with Utnapishtim, the man who lives forever. I am here because I wish to learn the secret of eternal life." "Eternal life is not possible," she said. "That is not possible. The gods give mortals life, they give them death as well. What you must do is cherish the small child who holds you by the hand. You must laugh and you must sing. Be happy in the embrace of your wife and of your loved ones. Enjoy the light on the flowers. Enjoy the taste of water, the buzz of the honeybee. Enjoy the feeling of wind against your face. Enjoy the music and the laughter of this life. For these things, too, were given to mortals by the gods. What you ask is impossible." And Gilgamesh heard these words, and he was filled with rage and sorrow and panic and frustration, and he grabbed a stick and he threw it at the door of that house, and he ran to the forest and he grabbed a stick and he began beating the trees, shredding their leaves and their branches, and he came to some stone statues of men, and he shattered them into pieces. There was stone in all directions, and he shouted and he cried, and he found some weird cup-like shapes that were made of stone, and he beat those all to pieces, and he thrashed and he groaned, he sobbed, he raged, he whistled, he cried, he ran until he was exhausted. And then he sat down beneath a tree, weeping, worn out, frustrated, panicked, scared, and tired. A spent man, he sat down under that tree, and he wept. And after some time, a man came walking through the forest. He came and he stood beside Gilgamesh, and he said, "Who are you who has come so far? Who are you, and what do you want?" And Gilgamesh said, "I am Gilgamesh, king of Uruk. I am here because the brother of my heart has died, and my days are filled with sorrow. I am here because I wish to speak with Utnapishtim, the man who lives forever, and to learn from him the secret of eternal life." And the man said, "I am Urshanabi, the ferryman for Utnapishtim. And you, my friend, have just smashed all the stone boats which I use to cross the Sea of Death. But if you go into this forest and cut down 120 poles, if you fashion these from the trees and bring them to the stone dock you see on the shore, well, I have one boat left. I think you and I might find a way." So Gilgamesh thanked him and went into the forest. and working for many days, he fashioned 120 wooden poles, and he brought them to the shore. And at the appointed hour, Urshanabi was there, and the two of them loaded these poles into a stone boat, and they got in that boat. And Urshanabi said, "Now, my friend, take hold of a pole, thrust it into the water, and push us off." So Gilgamesh did that, thrusting that pole down deep. Now the floor of the sea was very shallow. It was a wide, stagnant ocean. So he found he could reach the bottom, and he thrust that pole down and pushed that boat off, and it began to drift through the waters. And Urshanabi said, "Leave that pole where it is." And Gilgamesh let go, and he turned, and he saw that pole start to stagger and crackle. And then it crashed into the sea, and the sea devoured it, eating it up, sizzling until it was only just smoke and a little ash burning away in the air. "In this way, we will cross the sea of death," said Urshanabi. So, pole by pole, they crossed those dark waters. And every pole that Gilgamesh thrust down into the bottom of that sea soon crumbled and smoked away until it was devoured by those waters. After some time, they could not see the shore behind them. They could not see the shore ahead of them. Two men in a stone boat on a black sea, watching the poles sizzle and crackle behind them and become ash. But gradually, far ahead, they saw the opposite shore. But they were almost out of poles. Finally, there was only one pole left, and Gilgamesh gave a great cry, and he thrust that pole down into the bottom of the sea. And they drifted forward, and finally their boat nuzzled against the sand of that shore. Gilgamesh got out. There was a small house up on the shore. There was a man outside. He'd watched them approach. Gilgamesh walked towards him, and the man said, "Who are you who has come so far? Who are you, eater of food, drinker of liquids? Who are you, with sorrow in your face? Who are you, with an expression like one who has made a long, long journey? Who are you, and what do you want?" And Gilgamesh said, "I am Gilgamesh, king of Uruk. I am here because the brother of my heart, Enkidu, has died, because my days are filled with sorrow, and I see death inside all things like a secret flower. I am here because I wish to learn how I may live and never die." And Utnapishtim said, "My friend, what you ask is impossible. There is no permanence. Mortals are given life, and they are given death by the gods." "But you," said Gilgamesh, "you live forever. Tell me how it is that you and your wife live here at the mouth of all rivers, how the two of you never die." And Utnapishtim beckoned him to sit down in the shade of his house. And they leaned against the wall of that house. And he said, "Gilgamesh, listen closely. I will tell you the answer to your question. I will tell you one of the secrets of the gods." Long ago, at the beginning of time, this world was wild and it was loud. It was filled with noise. People did bad things. And so the gods decided that humans must be destroyed. Enlil, the god of earth, he gathered all the things together, the storm, the rider of the storm, the hurricanes, the tornadoes, the great waters. He gathered all these things and prepared to exterminate humanity. Humans knew nothing of this. But one day, I was weeding in my vegetable garden, when Ea, the trickster god, came down to earth, and he whispered, speaking, and he said, reed house, you must be a boat. Wooden door, you must go to sea. Man of earth, you must be a sailor. Man of earth, listen, you must go to sea. Reed house, you must be a boat. Wooden door, you must go to sea. Man of earth, you must be a sailor. Man of earth, listen, you must go to sea. And I heard his voice, and I said, what must I do? And Ea said, you must turn your house into a boat. Get all the carpenters you know, all the craftspeople, get them to work together. Turn your house into a boat. And then gather all the things you wish to save, the plants and the animals, the wild and the tame. Gather them and your family into your house, which will be a boat. And when the rain begins to fall, close the hatch, and do not open it until the rain stops. But what will I tell my neighbors, the people of this town? I said. How shall I explain this to them? And Ea said, tell them you have been cursed by the gods, that you have been cursed by Enlil, and must go far away across the sea. Tell them that for them blessings will rain down like rain itself. I will do this, I said. And so I gathered all the carpenters I knew. I told all of them to come. All the workers, they worked on my house. They made it into a boat. I fed them with every animal I had. I roasted chickens and oxes, all kinds of things, honey and wine. I paid them with these things. It was a great party in a way, everyone working, hammering and carpentering to make that boat as beautiful as it could be, as sturdy as it could be. And then when everything was finished, I gathered all the plants and animals I could into that boat, and I gathered my family. And one day the rains began. And so I closed the hatch, and outside the noise was terrible, wind rising, storms from far off, lightning, thunder. Soon the rivers flooded, soon my village was drowned. Soon the earth was nothing but a great sheet of water. Thunder blew, the Anunnaki with their torches came flying across the world. Humanity was like dead fish on the sea. And far off the gods themselves were afraid. They hid behind the stars, quivering there as the wind blew and battered the earth in 1,000 ways and pummeled the earth. This went on for days and days, and finally the rain stopped. And I opened the hatch, and sunlight flooded my boat. And I looked, and the air was clear. And I let loose a dove, and he flew off and he came back. He had found no resting place. And I let loose a swallow, and she flew off and came back. She had found no resting place. And I set free a crow, and the crow flew off and came back with muddy feet. So I set that crow free once more, and in my boat we followed that crow. And we came to a muddy hill. It was the top of the highest mountain in the world. And we lodged my boat there. It got stuck fast, and the waters began to go down. And my wife and I wept. We kissed the ground. We sang prayers to the gods and goddesses of this world. We made offerings of incense which burned and trickled up high into the sky. And the gods were hungry. No one had made offering for a long, long time. They clustered around our songs and our prayers like flies around honey. And Enlil, the god of earth, he came as well, and he was in a deep rage, and he said, has one family survived? One family? Humanity was to be exterminated, destroyed completely. How has one family survived? And Ea, the trickster god, spoke and said, do not be angry at this man. No one has whispered the secrets of the gods to him. He is a wise man. He learned the secrets of the gods in a dream. And so Enlil came to my boat, and he touched my wife and I on our foreheads, and he said, henceforth the two of you shall live forever. Once you were mortal, now you shall live for all time. You shall be called the Faraway. You will live at the edge of the world. I give you my blessing. So you see, Gilgamesh, the world was destroyed. I saw it all. I saw humanity like dead fish on the sea. I saw horrible things. That is why I live forever. But who will destroy the world for your sake? Who will gather the gods in council, simply so you may live and never die? What you ask is not possible. But there must be some way, said Gilgamesh, something that can be done, so that I and my people can live without the fear of death every day. And Utnapishtim said, Gilgamesh, sleep is the brother of death. Let us see if you can prevail against sleep for 7 days and 7 nights. If you can do that, if you can stay awake for that long, well, then you and I will talk." "I will do this," said Gilgamesh. And he went and he sat down beneath the tree, resolving to stay awake for 7 days and 7 nights. But only a little time passed, and soon, exhausted, worn out, Gilgamesh fell asleep. Utnapishtim's wife came out of the house. The two of them looked at Gilgamesh. And she spoke and said, "Look, the great hero, the king of Uruk, defeated by tiredness." "Yes," said Utnapishtim, "but all men are deceivers. When he awakes, he will try to say that he has hardly slept at all." "Here is what I will do," said his wife. "Every day I will bake an extra loaf of bread. I will place these loaves beside his body. Then when he awakes, he will know for how long he has slept." So she did that. And 7 days later, Gilgamesh awoke. Utnapishtim was there, squatting beside him. I hardly slept at all," said Gilgamesh. "No, my friend, you slept for 7 days," said Utnapishtim. "Look at these loaves of bread. Each day my wife bakes a loaf of bread." And Gilgamesh looked, and beside his body, indeed, there was a warm, sweet loaf of bread, still warm from the oven. And beside it was another loaf, which was cold. And the third loaf was cold, and it was hard as well. And the fourth loaf was cold and hard, and green mold was growing on it. And the fifth loaf of bread was covered entirely in green and blue mold. And the sixth had green, blue, and black mold on it. And the seventh was nothing but worms and black fungus. "So you see," said Utnapishtim, "you have slept for 7 days." And Gilgamesh wept. And Utnapishtim said, "Now, my friend, you must return." "Ushanabi," he called, and Ushanabi came. "Ushanabi, take this man back. He never should have come. And you, my friend, you are banished from these shores. You must return with him to Uruk. Live out your days there. This man should never have come to this place. The two of you must go." So they gathered poles from a nearby forest, 120 poles. They put them in the stone boat, and they prepared to leave. But just when they were about to depart, Utnapishtim's wife came down, and she said, "My dear husband, give this poor man something. Give him something to take back to his people. He has come such a long way." And Utnapishtim said, "Gilgamesh, walk down this shore, and you will come to a clear, sweet river. The waters of that river will not harm you. Then tie stones to your feet and plunge down to the bottom of that riverbed. There you will find a plant growing, a prickly, leafy plant. Pluck it from the riverbed and bring it up to the air above. This plant, when it is eaten by humans, gives them long life." "Thank you," said Gilgamesh. So he walked down the shore, and he came to that clear, sweet river. He tied stones to his feet, and he plunged down to the bottom of that river. And indeed, there was a green, prickly plant there. He plucked it and brought it up to the air above. And then he walked back to the stone boat, cradling that leaf in his hands. "I will call this the leaf that brings long life," he said. "I will bring it back to Uruk. We will plant it in the gardens of Uruk, and all my people shall eat of it, and they will live for a very long time." So he was happy, and they got in the boat, and once again they pushed off. And once again, pole by pole, they crossed the sea of death, each pole staggering back into the water and smoking behind them until it was no longer there. And then they reached the shore, and they crossed that shore, and they worked, and they crossed that shore, and they walked through the mountains of Mashu, down that long tunnel. They made it to the other side. They passed the two scorpion beings and walked through the wilderness. They went for many days. And finally, all worn out, one afternoon, they came to a beautiful blue watering hole. And Gilgamesh said, "I will swim in this watering hole, for I have had a long journey." And he took the leaf that brings long life, and he put it on the shore. And Gilgamesh dove into those waters, and swam and was nourished and refreshed. But when he was in the middle of that watering hole, he looked, and he saw a snake slithering through the grass towards that leaf which brings long life. And so quickly he swam to the shore in alarm, but by the time he got there, that snake had eaten that leaf entirely. Gilgamesh stood there, dripping with water, and he watched that snake shed its skin and slither beneath the rock. And Gilgamesh wept. "Now I have nothing," he said. "I have gone so far, and I have nothing at all." "No," said Ushabti. "You have the story of your journey. Bring that back to your people. Bring this wisdom to your people. For this too was given to you by the gods, and it will nourish your people." So they set out and walked through the wilderness. And finally they reached the city of Uruk, and were welcomed by the people there. And Gilgamesh summoned a scribe, and he dictated his whole journey to this scribe. And he wrote it down on this clay tablet, and it was stored in a cedar box in the treasury of the palace of Uruk. And Gilgamesh reigned for many years, and he was a wise king, and he was not cruel. And he taught the people to remember the gods, for remembrance is truly the food of the gods. And years went by, and the world was in harmony with the gods and with the spirits and with the trees of the forest as well. And then one day, when Gilgamesh was very old, he became sick, and he lay down on a bed of pain, and he suffered for 9 days, and he died. And the people buried him, and they sang songs in praise of Gilgamesh and in praise of the gods. These songs went high up into the sky, and the incense of their offerings went high up into the sky. And so the people buried Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh the great king of Uruk, Gilgamesh who traveled to the edge of the world and learned the secrets of the gods. We begin with the sun, we begin with the moon. We begin with a bitter village inside the seed. We begin with the equations of innocence inside the flowers, the cries of the birds, the shells that know nothing after they are empty, when they wash upon the shore, when they are found by the birds. We begin with the questions that unravel themselves in the darkness. We begin with the village. May we be at home in that village. May we learn there who we are in our most deepest part of ourselves. May we set out from that place to find a wildness which will feed us and nourish us and everything besides us that is not us. May we find there the seeds, and from them will grow the flowers and the roots and the trees that will nourish all life to come in a time beyond our own. Thank you for listening to this story, this big, heavy story. Is it a heavy story? Well, in this part, we have death. Death comes. Gilgamesh learns what it is, in a way, and he sets out to solve it. Do we like to solve death? Band-Aids, hospitals, doctors, x-ray machines, a new treatment. Yes, pills for your soul, pills for your bones, medicine that will keep you alive forever in a titanium house. May you live forever. May you be like a god. So in this part of the story, Gilgamesh tries to live forever because he sees what death is, because he feels sorrow. This is a story of change. This entire epic is a story of change. We begin with Gilgamesh, who is cruel, who is powerful and cruel, and he becomes wise. And how does he find that wisdom? Is it from holy people? Is it from holy books? It is from sorrow. Grief teaches him. Grief is his professor. Grief is his school of ash, and he dwells in that school and walks a long way. And his desire in his heart to cure things, to cure death, of course, drives him on. And perhaps that is not a bad thing, that desire, exactly. For it does move the story forward. It moves his life forward. We need to leave the village so we may become wise. And then we need to return. So this journey is a great leaving and a great return. If I were to lie down in this story, if I were to find a place to rest, and I would say, I hope you can find a place in this story to dwell. Right now, it'll be different tomorrow. It'll be different in a week. But perhaps now you can remember the images of this story. The scorpion beings, the woman brewing wine at the edge, the woman making wine at the edge of the Sea of Death. Utnapishtim there and his wife, living in the land on the other side of the Sea of Death. Those poles just going into the water and being sizzling away into nothing. Enkidu on his deathbed, dying and raving, the knowledge within him of the natural world fading and whistling away into nothing. Gilgamesh walking by the watering hole where Enkidu once drank. These are all images from the story. There are many more. They're all jewels in the necklace. They are notes in the music. And perhaps there is a place in there for you to dwell. Perhaps you can see the story around you, as I certainly do when I look at hospitals, when I think of the way we try to beat death, when I see sorrow and wisdom mingled in this world. I think of this story. But for me, if I were to lie down in this story, if I were to find a place right now, it would be in that strange moment where Gilgamesh freaks out, where he panics after he's spoken with the woman who's making wine there, Shaduri, who's making wine at the edge of the sea. She tells him what everyone else tells him, which is that death is a part of life. It is given to us by the gods. It can't be washed away. It can't be taken away. She tells him that good, solid wisdom, and he flips out, and he throws a stick at her house, and he runs away to the forest and just starts beating on the trees, and he smashes the stone boats that could have gotten him more easily across the Sea of Death. I love that moment because it seems very human and real to me. He's a hero, yes, but he's an evil hero at the beginning. He's an evil tyrant. And he becomes a hero by the sorrow that happens to him. For me, he becomes a hero because of his, his determination to go forward, I guess. And what he longs for is often what I long for, what we long for. To live and not to die. Who doesn't want that? Who doesn't want that? And then he's filled. I mean, how would you feel after running through this mountain, after speaking with the scorpions, after undergoing the death of the friend of your heart, the brother of your heart, the death of anyone you love dearly? And then he flips out, and he gives up his kingship, of course, and heads into the desert. And then there's this moment with Shaduri on the edge of the Sea of Death where he just kind of loses it. So I like that's in this story, this 4,000-year-old story. It seems very true and very human to me. If he had just been like, all right, okay, all right. But he wasn't that way. He has weakness, for he is a main character filled with weakness, which is a beautiful thing. And then we go across the sea, a beautiful image, across the Sea of Death. He and Urshanabi in the stone boat, and they can't see the coast behind them or in front of them, poling their way across that sea. Perhaps you felt like that, dear listener, dear speaker of this story. For you, or perhaps a teller of this tale as much as I am, and I am as much a listener as you are. Empty shell on the beach that I am, root that I am of some tree of eloquence may I hope to be, that breathes and sings through us. Yes, indeed. It's a big story, and I see it around us, and I hope it can nourish you in some beautiful way. And so he goes, takes this long journey, and he gets finally the story of the flood from Utnapishtim. Utnapishtim, what a name. That's great. It's like a subway with a cherry at the front. Utnapishtim. It's great. So he hears the story of the flood. And I should say, perhaps, let you know, this was kind of a mind-blowing thing when this story came to light. This tablet containing this story was one of about 25,000 tablets found in a buried library in the desert in what is now Iraq in the 19th century, and then brought to the British Museum, and people worked to translate them there. Brought to the British Museum, well, yes, stolen from Iraq, you could say, certainly. Though the people in Iraq at the time could not see why these foreigners were so interested in these old tablets. But lest we get snooty, let's not get snooty, or let us say racist. Let us not be racist. Probably most English people as well would have said the same. What are you interested in those old tablets for? What do you want them for? Nevertheless, they took them to the British Museum, and they were eventually translated, a long labor, which took a long time. And eventually, and so one of the first ones they found was this one with the flood story in it. And that was a big surprise because this was in Victorian England. Charles Darwin had published his papers. People were already wrestling with that. Hey, the Bible is the Word of God. That is the truth. That is how the world was made. And then we get Darwin's story that, well, actually, we're descended from gorillas. How does that dance? How does that work together with the Bible? How can it? It's impossible. What's going on? So people were flummoxed and outraged, of course. And then you get this. You get a flood story, very similar to the Bible story, and it's thousands of years older. What does that mean? Crazy. So that rocked the world of the people who first heard it. And it's kind of an amazing story, this quest of humans to know stuff, to find out, just like Gilgamesh wants to find out, and he's on a quest. So the human race learns these things in bits and pieces, and through sorrow, perhaps, we become wiser. And then we get the snake, right? I mean, there's so many beautiful things. The bread is great. The bread just as a measure of the passage of time, these loaves of bread, it's so clear, Every day is like a loaf of bread, and then they mold, and they're filled with fungus and worms. Wow. I mean, I don't know what it means. It's great. It's like a dream, and it's so intense, The days of our lives go. They're like that warm bread. It is so wonderful, and then fades and becomes hard and rots away. And Utnapishtim and his wife, the dear wife who actually instigates things with giving Gilgamesh something, give the man something, and he gets this plant, this flower plucked from the bottom of the sea, which will help us to live longer at least, and he loses that to the snake. So even that he doesn't bring back. He doesn't come back with a big victory at all. He just went on this long quest and completely failed. He has only the story of the quest at the end. And we who listen to this story have only that story, perhaps, as well. But perhaps that story can be powerful. Perhaps that is enough. And if it will not bring us eternal life, well, maybe it'll bring us long life to think upon these things, to reflect upon them. Thank you for listening to this story. May it sit well in your hearts. May it nourish you. May it nourish others. I encourage you to remember this story. Try telling it to someone. It's not that, it's not that big a deal. Not a big thing. You don't need any special training, really. It can live in you as well as it lives in me or in anywhere else. Or in a book, but to live in you, in your breath, in your voice, in your imagination, well, that is something special. So try telling this one, There was a king, and he was cruel. And the people cried out, and the gods sent down a wild man to teach him wisdom. That's all. Beautiful, simple story, like a seed. I give you this seed into your hand. May you carry it Thank you for listening to this podcast. Thanks to the Patreon supporters who help make this podcast possible. If you're able to join them, please do so. That is a great help in getting eloquence and imagination out into the world, in sharing these ancient spoken maps, which are contemporary and are our future. They are ancient, but they are fresh. They are seeds which blossom up with our attention and tell us perhaps who we are. Thank you for listening to this, and take care.